Hey there everybody, I'm Joshua Hodges and welcome to my channel. This video was supposed to go on channel 3, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it is so ridiculous, so outrageous, and so warranting of national headlines that I decided to put it on the main channel. It's about Brian France and his lawsuit against a parody Twitter account. For the uninitiated, from about 2003 to 2018, Brian France was the CEO of NASCAR. And initially he was a decent guy. But as his tenure wore on, his reputation got worse and worse and worse. It came to an abrupt end in July of 2018, where in Watkins Glen, New York, he was pulled over for erratic driving and then arrested on a DUI charge. Now, already that's ridiculous, because you would think that a CEO for auto racing of all sports would know better than to drive drunk. Now, he also had oxytocin or something like that in his system, but that's another discussion to be had. I'm not going to get into that. Okay, so he is forced out of the company, and his uncle Jim France ends up taking over. Well, sometime before he got arrested for drunk driving, this guy on Twitter opened up a parody account called Drunken Brian France. Now, it was just a coincidence that the account opened up in 2014, and that in 2018, Brian France was in fact arrested for drunk driving. The true irony behind that is that there was this whole lawsuit between NASCAR and Jeremy Mayfield back in 2009 over allegations of falsification of a drug test, which was used to suspend Jeremy Mayfield. Because earlier, another NASCAR driver, and I honestly forget who it was arrested for a narcotics possession charge, and complained that, how come NASCAR didn't catch me first? He publicly complained about it. And so that's where a lot of people thought that this whole Jeremy Mayfield saga came from. Now, a bunch of other people have discussed the Jeremy Mayfield versus NASCAR dispute. Out of principle, I'm going to assume he was innocent this entire time. Now, it's true that in 2011, or perhaps 2014, I forget which year, it's true that sometime during that frame, he was actually arrested for possession of a narcotic. However, the informant later died while fleeing police on his motorcycle for an unrelated charge in another district. With the sole informant dead, the charges were dropped by default. And so, so I can safely assume that perhaps Jeremy Mayfield had narcotics in his possession at the time of that incident, but for all I care, he was absolutely innocent over the 2009 spectacle. That was a news media story in and of its own. Alright, enough about that. Let's jump ahead 10 years to when Brian France was arrested for DUI. By now, there's already an account on Twitter that says that belongs to, quote, Drunken Brian France, close quote. This is a parody account. It's obviously meant to be funny. It's obviously meant to tell readers, hey, this is not the real Brian France. Well, after the mugshot was publicly released, the owner of the account decided to use the mugshot as a profile picture for the parody account. Excuse me. And now, just yesterday, as of the date that this audio podcast was recorded, Brian France announced he is suing the owner of the account for libel and defamation. He is seeking a measly $15,000 in damages, which for him personally is probably nothing, but for this guy is probably out of pocket through the roof. Here's the hypocrisy in Brian France filing this lawsuit. I guess hypocrisy is not the right word. Here's the lunacy behind the lawsuit. Let's flash back to 2013 when let's flash back to 2007 where in Bristol they did the first race with the car of tomorrow, which was the Gen 5 car. Kyle Busch won the race, but he wasn't happy. In Victory Lane, he quipped,
"I'm still not a very big fan of these things. I can't stand to drive when they suck."
So, at the time, there was no rule prohibiting drivers from criticizing the sanctioning body. Well, I'm assuming in the wake of that, that's when the rule on disparaging comments was created. Then in 2013, Denny Hamlin said that the Generation 6 car had some work to be done on it. For that, he was fined $25,000 by NASCAR. Now, the fine itself became a bigger scandal than Denny Hamlin's comments. Flash forward a few months, and it comes out that NASCAR has had a history of doing this in secret for the past X amount of years, I'm assuming since 2008. And amid public scrutiny, they announced they would no longer secretly fine drivers for disparaging comments. The loophole is that they would stop secretly fining the drivers, and that they would still continue to fine the drivers, but they would publicly announce it. Well, it never happened until 2016, when Tony Stewart criticized the sanctioning body over a safety concern about the one lug nut per wheel pit stop rule. He was fined $35,000, I think. I may be wrong about that sum of money, which led to other drivers criticizing the rule. None of the other drivers were fined for criticizing the sanctioning body, but Tony Stewart's fine was upheld. It seems that almost as soon as Brian France was ousted from the company, the disparaging comments rule was discontinued, or at the very least, narrowly redefined. And now Brian France is trying to collect monetary damages from something that is not within his jurisdiction. It's true that Twitter has a rule about impersonating other people on account, but as a general rule of thumb, parody accounts are exempt. The lawsuit itself hinges on the idea that people are going to mistake the drunken Brian France Twitter account for a genuine Brian France Twitter account. As far as we are aware, ironically, Brian France himself is not on Twitter. The lawsuit also seems to hinge on the idea that the account was created after Brian France's arrest for drunk driving, which there are enough tweets on the account to disprove that claim. So honestly, I think the owner of the Twitter account should countersue Brian France for $60,000, with the stipulation that $25,000 goes to Denny Hamlin and $35,000 goes to Tony Stewart. I know for much of this podcast I've just been raving and ranting about it, but I want to hear from you guys. What do you think about this lawsuit between Brian France and a Twitter parody? Drop a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you haven't already, click the links in the description to go to Channel 2 and Channel 3.